So I should start by saying this is a collaboration between three of us, Margaret Tingey, Mags Tingey, me and my colleague Dan van der Horst. And what we did was to take a series of considerable in-depth and detailed local authority case studies of and ask a set of questions about what exactly is it? What kinds of activities do we see across British, i.e. English, Scottish and Welsh local authorities in relation to energy services? And please do read the paper, hoping that those slides will be there for people to find the link to the paper, because as Petra said, there's not enough time to talk about the details. So what was our question? Well, how do British local authorities manage energy efficiency improvements in buildings? And we used that term pretty broadly, not just to talk about the retrofit of buildings, one of which you can see here, interesting area, questions relating to the cladding, external cladding of multi-storey blocks, of course. Not just external fabric improvements and internal fabric improvements, but also to resource efficiencies through district energy infrastructure, particularly local heat networks and their development, and the extent to which local authorities were able to combine the retrofit of buildings with upgrades to the local heat supply through district heating networks using low carbon heat sources. So we put together from our total 40 case studies a typology that extracted 6 different models from across 31 case studies. All of these were local authority-led initiatives, and in that sense focused first and foremost on what it was that a range of local authorities were trying to achieve, and then what kinds of structures they were using to achieve that. And let me just sum up very quickly what the key findings were. So 6 retrofit models and energy service models in common use, all concerned with both upgrading buildings or developing district and communal heating. All, I have to say, in the context of some very difficult circumstances, exemplify the sort of resourcefulness that we see in local authorities across the piece in the face of quite fragmented policies over the last decade, particularly in England, considerable financial austerity, context of shrinking energy services teams in local authorities rather than of growing energy services teams, despite the obvious need and despite, I think, more than ample evidence about the multiple and co-benefits from such coherent programmes of work. So, of course, just to point out and to provide the punchline before we get there, all of these models fall well short of the radical changes that we know are necessary in energy saving, which Nick referred to at the start. We also know that it is very difficult actually to do this kind of research and to find out what the impacts of any of these initiatives were, what the actual impacts were in terms of energy use in the buildings that were improved, because again, the data question is up there in the front. Now, I've put that slide up in the full knowledge that people are not going to be able to read it, with apologies. So there is a much clearer, of course, page in the article which says, well, here are the 6 energy service models which were used by local authorities. Let me tell you, because I'm pretty sure you won't be able to read it unless you've got better eyesight than me, what those were. The most common by far is the top line there, municipal in-house energy service models. And of course, the advantage there, this was about 1/3 of our set of case studies, simply proceeded on an in-house basis, put together teams of people, some contracting out of work, but by and large done and led and orchestrated and managed throughout by the local authorities themselves. Focusing particularly on social housing, of course, most straightforward to do in many ways, allowed some very flexible combination both of debt and equity, of different sorts of grant funding, of whatever was available at the time. And local authorities, as I'm sure most of our audience are aware, were quite adept at pulling together multiple sources of funding to proceed. Second one there is an energy performance contracting model. Less common. We had about five cases of that in use. And in that context, of course, it's a local authority setting up a contract with a private provider, typically, to improve the corporate estate, mainly, to look at the energy performance of buildings and to guarantee certain energy savings, in exchange for which the local authority pays a fee for that service, pays off over time the costs of it. There are also, of course, we looked at the Energiesprong model, which is a form of energy performance contracting in social housing. That was the only model that looked at whole house deep retrofitting, and that was in Nottingham. And of course, the houses look fantastic. I actually went on a visit to that site, but we're talking about something like a few hundred out of thousands of social housing units in Nottingham. So very limited as yet, need radically scaling up. Municipal district energy company models, doing a range of activities. I can see Nick's going to shout at me to finish. I better move on rapidly. In some ways, the most flexible of the business models that we looked at was setting up a third sector enterprise of some sort, and they ranged across community enterprise companies, but also partnerships between the local authority and community co-ops, as well as a company such as Aberdeen Heat and Power, which is set up as a company limited by guarantee. There are also district energy concession contracting models, primarily Angers is an example of a company there that provides those sorts of long-term contracts with local authorities where the local authority is unwilling or very conservative about taking on any of the risk of developing district energy services, including retrofit, somewhat limited on the ability to retrofit fabric of buildings. So there was one public-private venture there in those concession contract models, which gives a longer term opportunity to carry on that work and to develop for the local authority to set a bigger part of the agenda. And then, so what are the implications of all of that? I won't talk about what happened in that the sixth one, of course, was the failed now energy retail model, municipal energy retailers. I won't go into detail on that. Overall, what are the implications then of what we saw in those six models? Of course, we need better policy, and we need that policy backed up by effective regulation on energy efficiency standards. And a quick cursory read of the Heat and Buildings strategy published yesterday suggests that much of this is still to be done. It's still waiting detailed attention. Market reform in the energy retail market certainly needed to support these kinds of services for reducing energy use rather than selling kilowatt hours. Local authorities need the powers, again, I think not sufficiently addressed in what I've read of the Heat and Buildings strategy so far. And of course, that data question, which people have already alluded to. Finally, I would argue that all needs to be backed up by progressive increases in the regulatory framework combined with low-cost lending, because at the moment we are not getting very far with private property owners, of whom there are a majority in Britain. Thank you.